Welcome to another edition of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum. Well, just when you thought everything was all about COVID, well, the economy is still a big issue, and how we react to the cratering of the economy as a result of the lockdown. Mr. Pat Kelly, who is also the Member of Parliament for Calgary, Rocky Ridge. Pat, thank you for joining our program today.
Well, thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
I gave some big numbers off the top. They are huge numbers. Tell us what your reaction to those numbers was when you first heard them.
Just an estimate in as recent as June, I think, that was predicting $250 billion. We had some media speculation that sounded like it was going to be on the order of $300 billion, and then the shock today of actually being $342 billion, a truly staggering number.
And just to break this down for our viewers, this is not just a number out in space. It means that every man, woman, and child in Canada is shouldering that deficit and that national debt, right?
Yes, this is a transformational moment. The piling on almost a quarter of Canada's GDP, so a quarter of the value of every good and just being piled on as new debt is in such a short period of time. It's truly staggering, and will be this will have impacts that will go on for decades.
At the same time, we were hearing, I guess, numbers indicating that our job performance in Canada is poor as well, that we have the highest unemployment rate in the G7 group of countries. Is that correct?
Yes, and we entered the COVID pandemic not in great shape. We had within the G7, only France and Italy had worse unemployment. And now, several months into the pandemic, we now have the highest unemployment rate in the G7.
You're from a region of the country that has been hard hit too. You represent a Calgary riding. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective on the ground what's going on in the economic situation in Alberta and in Calgary, and what these numbers might portend for the future as well?
Well, it's devastating to my riding. I mean, we have sort of a three-prong set of hits that we've taken. We've taken the cumulative anti-energy agenda, really, of this government with its anti-pipeline bills and whatnot that's been going on since 2015. Pile that on with a collapse in the price of oil due to the price war and between Saudi Arabia and Russia that had driven commodity prices just about into the ground, and then you add COVID to that, and it's devastating. I've spent much of my time during the pandemic just responding to constituents that really are desperate for their livelihoods.
You know, the timing is very interesting, Pat Kelly, because in the UK, I think today as well, their version of finance minister, their Chancellor Sunak, was delivering his economic address, and they were talking about tax holidays. They were talking about helping business bounce back from the pandemic. There really is no plan forward from the economic statement here in Canada, is there?
No, and that's another thing that sets us aside from our G7 contemporaries, that there is no national plan to restart the economy, and the status quo is just untenable. There has to be safely respecting people's health and safety to get people back working. Many of the aid measures were designed specifically to discourage work, and that was an appropriate policy direction for March, to ensure that people weren't jeopardizing their health and safety by going to work. But now we have people that are being encouraged to stay home. A worker that crosses that $1,000 threshold in employment income loses the full benefit of the CERB. So there's no back to work bonus. There's no thought to scale the CERB so that it doesn't punish people that can at least work maybe part time or have a few shifts. And it really hurts businesses that are trying to get their workers back and be able to schedule their workers, maybe only on a part-time basis at first, where for many workers, it's in their best interest to stay home so they don't jeopardize losing their benefit.
Hold that thought for a second, Pat Kelly. We're going to take a brief commercial break and we'll be right back with more questions. Hold on.
I think the most important thing is just educating yourself and listening to other people's opinions. I think even if you have your own strong opinions, I think it's so important to listen to other people's. Even if you consider yourself a closed-minded person, left or right, I think it's important to listen to the other side, and I think that's how we can be inclusive and respectful.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. With me today is Member of Parliament Pat Kelly from the riding of Calgary Rocky Ridge. He's also the Associate Shadow Minister of Finance, basically the opposition critic, along with Pierre Poilievre for Finance. Today was a big day in terms of the economic statement of Bill Morneau and the federal government. We were talking a little bit just before we had to break off about CERB and the proper incentives to get the economy restarted. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because your job as an opposition critic is not only to criticize the government, but where appropriate, maybe say, here's where we should do better. What are your thoughts on where we should go as an economy on these points?
Well, one thing that we have been calling for quite some time now is, again, to build into the CERB benefit an incentive to when work is available and it's safe to go to work, so that no Canadian will be worse off for working. And we proposed a back to work bonus. CERB benefit will be scaled back, so that a worker that can earn a certain amount of money, over $1,000, can actually still come out ahead by working. So for workers that are going to earn anywhere between $1,000 and $5,000 per month, they will have their CERB benefit scaled back, and not lose money by going back to work, because it's uncertain. Some workers, they don't know if they're only going to get one shift a week, or if they're going to get 3 or 4 shifts a week. They have to make decisions that are in their best interest, financially, just as we wanted people to make the decisions that were in their health interest as we shut down the economy in March.
Well, this is the point, because obviously the economy is coming back in fits and starts. It's not like one size fits all to every area of the country, every region, or even indeed every province. So different things are going to happen at different speeds, aren't they?
Absolutely, we see that across the country in different rates of safe, restarting of the economy, and certainly different industries. We've had some industries, of course, that continue to function during the peak of the shutdown, and particularly industries like tourism, travel type industries. Convention hosting, these kinds of things are going to be presumably among the very last things to recover, and so we have workers at every spectrum of expectation being able to go back to work in the short term.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the feeling in Alberta as well. Obviously, people want to get back to work. Is there a feeling of optimism that the worst is over at this point?
Well, we're an optimistic group in Alberta, and yes, we always hope for better, and we always hope that around the corner, things will get better. But I must say, I've spoken to a lot of my constituents during this time, and there is a lot of fear. There is a lot of downright despair in some cases. Many of the aid packages and programs that the government has proposed have had mixed results in terms of eligibility from small business owners, for example. We also had the promise of Bill Morneau back in, I think it was April. I don't remember the date now, but where he said that an aid package for the oil and gas industry was hours or maybe days ahead. And here we are in July, and there has been no oil and gas aid measure, not something to that the industry can recover through which the industry can recover.
One of the predictions as a result of these deficit numbers is that to hold interest rates so low may not be sustainable for the foreseeable future. That there would be a rise in interest rates. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that would have for Canadians?
Yeah, the impact would be devastating. And right now, the interest rates are in part being sustained at low levels because of intervention by the Bank of Canada in buying bonds in the secondary market, as well as well, I mean, they're printing enormous amounts of money, and this is not sustainable either. This isn't something that can be done for years and years. This is must be a temporary measure. We're going to need to get past those kinds of tools, just borrowing and printing money to sustain an economy with mass unemployment. We need to get past that and return Canada to an employment economy. There's just absolutely no substitute for a fully working economy.
Pat Kelly, we're going to have to leave it at that for now. There's plenty to discuss, and there will be plenty to discuss in the future. But thank you for being on our program today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Like just experiencing like everyone's like unique cultures, and like that could involve like celebrating their holidays or enjoying festivities or events that certain like ethnic like cultures would celebrate.
And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. Continuing on this theme of the economic statement, we have with us today Mr. Aaron WUDRICK, who is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Aaron, welcome to the program again.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So I'd like to get initially your initial reaction when you heard the news of the massive deficit that has been posted and the national debt. What was your first reaction?
Well, it's a real eye-popping number, Tony. I mean, you'll recall that even as recently as 4 months ago, the deficit was supposed to be in the $30 billion range. Suddenly we're at $343 billion, 1,000% more in just 4 months. Is really just something we've never seen before. It's going to put our federal debt at $1 trillion, which is a 1 with 12 zeros. Again, just uncharted territory. So we're talking staggering amounts of money here. And like a lot of this spending was probably necessary given the nature of the crisis we're in. But what was really disappointing was that we didn't really see any sort of plan. There was no sort of explanation. Where is the government going from here? How are they going to wind spending down? How are they going to get us back to something resembling normal and something close to a balanced budget?
I want to unpack that a little bit later, but first I want to explain to our viewers what these numbers are so large. They're unfathomable for most people, and I would put myself in that category too. Tell us what this means to the average Canadian, these debt numbers.
Yeah, you're right. For most of us, millions, billions, trillions, it's not the kind of dollars and cents we deal with every day. And you might wonder, what does it mean for me, $343 billion? Well, it's worth about $10,000 per Canadian. That's your share of the debt that's been incurred. So for all 36 million Canadians, that's how much it is. And the impact it has on services, of course, if you have a credit card and any debt, you'll know that you have to pay interest on that. And that takes away from the money you can spend on other things. So the bigger our debt is, the more we pay in interest and the less we have to spend on the programs and services that we think we're getting when we pay our taxes.
I also there's been some analysis of this and some worries posted. I want to get your reaction. First of all, what does this mean for future taxes?
Well, the obvious risk is that there will be people calling for higher taxes. Now, the silver lining is the minister today and in the last week has said that he does not want to raise taxes. I certainly am going to clip and save that for future years. But at the end of the day, there's only two ways that you can close the gap. You either have to get more revenue or you have to cut spending. We certainly think they need to do some cutting on the spending side, definitely the temporary stuff, and maybe even beyond that. But the real question mark is how they plan to get the economy back to the point where we've got enough revenue to even come close to balancing the budget.
There's also some speculation that this will have an impact on future interest rates. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so obviously, we've already seen one credit downgrade. Just like with a bank, if you have bad credit, you pay a higher interest rate. And Canada used to have a AAA rating, and we got downgraded by one agency. So the longer we go without a clear plan, the greater the risk we get another downgrade, and then that in turn increases the cost of borrowing. So we really need to avoid that. I don't really see any sort of proactive move by the government here to address it. And that's maybe the biggest concern. This was really just sort of what they called it, a snapshot, and that's what it was. There was no plan. It was basically just listing what the situation is today without really telling us where they think it's going.
Yeah, I found this interesting. I was mentioning to Pat Kelly, who was also a guest on this program, that basically the same day in the UK, the finance minister equivalent, the Chancellor, Sunak, was delivering an economic statement, and basically he was cutting taxes in order to get the economy growing in the UK, but we're getting signals that are going in the opposite direction here in Canada.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to be calling, they're going to put out a more comprehensive plan, and I think tax relief has to be part of that. The reality is a lot of businesses especially are struggling, and it's a very easy way to help them out, to make it easier for them to survive, because that's where we're at right now, Tony, is survival, never mind recovery. And I think the government needs to look at that. So it's disappointing that they've waited this long. I could understand the first couple of months there, they were prepared to put out a budget, but it's been 4 months. Other countries are getting their act together. I think we need to.
We're speaking with Aaron WUDRICK. He is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, as we get a reaction to the economic statement of the federal government. We've got a short commercial break coming, and we'll be back after that, so stay tuned.
Because I feel it's pretty important to just not only look at one source of information, just like you have a whole wide world of information out there, so you have more than one place to look for. So if you're making your own decision out of just one source of information, then okay, that's fine, and you are making it yourself, but you're just looking in one spot. So it's always good to just have the whole story before judging and saying you already have the whole story in your head.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here as we discuss the economic statement of the federal Liberal government. With us for this segment is Mr. Aaron WUDRICK, who is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. Aaron, thank you again for being part of the program today.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the impact of the economic statement such as it is. What are you hearing from the ground from your members? You've got small businesses who are members of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. You've got individuals. What are they saying about the current situation?
I think there's a lot of frustration that the spending sort of continues apace. I think the fact that the government has not adjusted a lot of the programs to the new reality. I mean, in March, you were paying people to stay home because you wanted them to stay home. Now we're paying people to stay home even though we want them to go back to work. So it doesn't make any sense that a program that was maybe necessary in March hasn't been adjusted for July. And this is a lot of money we're talking about. I mean, it's billions of dollars a month that's being spent. And it's actually undermining the recovery. I mean, we need to get the economy back, and paying people to stay home is actually working against that. So it's a double whammy. It's a waste of money, and it's undermining the recovery at the same time.
You're an organization that tries to represent its members, of course, and you not only want to critique government, but you want to, I'm sure, suggest and nudge government to a better public policy. What are you saying about COVID, in particular the COVID economy, and with this new economic statement? How would you address these issues?
Yeah, I think the first thing they need to do is start thinking about ways to reduce spending. The obvious thing is to certainly put an end to the temporary spending, phasing it out, tightening up programs. That needs to happen sooner or later. And the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be. So I think they need to think about that. The other thing is they need to think about cutting beyond that. The reality is we spend so much now we won't even be able to afford the government we had before this, which we were also running deficits even before the pandemic. People can't forget that. So I think the government has to understand they're going to face some hard choices. It is not going to be pleasant, but the longer they put it off, the more painful it's going to be. And I think the less patience and buy-in they're going to have from the public.
It's been increasingly difficult to focus Canadians on the impact of deficits and debt. There was a time when Paul Martin was finance minister under Jean Chrétien. The opposition was led by Preston Manning of the Reform Party, and there was a general consensus in the House of Commons, and I would dare say more generally in the Canadian population, that deficits and debt were inherently bad, that they created bad results. People suffered as a result of deficits and debt, and that government should try to find ways to get out of them as quickly as possible. That seems to have dissipated in terms of the public dialogue. Are you sensing the same thing? And if so, how do you fight against that?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge some years because for a lot of people, especially people who were too young to remember what happened in the early 1990s and how painful that exercise was, they don't see how it impacts their day-to-day life. And in that sense, I actually think that COVID there's a silver lining in that it has really sort of brought right in front of people's eyes the impact. They see how it's impacted businesses. They see how people have lost jobs. And they recognize that all the borrowing we've done over the last few months has been to see us through so that we could survive for a few months. But they know that we'll have to pay it back. And I certainly hope that governments are honest with Canadians about that going forward. We've borrowed a lot of money. We have to pay it back. There is no way we are going to be able to get through this without any future pain. And I think at least the fact that this is a crisis that we've all had to live through will at least give a sort of common reference points to everyone as to why we incurred this debt and why we have to pay it back.
So quickly, you're starting to see maybe a turnaround in public opinion, maybe amongst millennials and other segments of the population when it comes to these economic issues?
I think so. I think even people who are very cavalier about debt, it's a very different story when your debt's $300 billion rather than $30 billion. And I'm seeing even the people who sort of shrugged off smaller deficits, even they're concerned now. And that to me is a good sign because it shows that they take it seriously. And, hopefully they will be on the same side as groups like ours when we're pointing out that we've got to get spending back under control.
Aaron WUDRICK of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, thanks for being part of our program, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. Thank you. Deficits, debt, taxes, they seem like esoteric terms, but they have meaningful impacts on everyday lives. We've heard from a couple of spokespeople today, and we will be continuing with these topics in the future. Stay tuned for future broadcasts, and thank you.